What is up, and happy Thursday. Today we are talking about traction and the process you can use to find it and a whole lot more. Welcome to Startup Shop Talk, my weekly office hours where I answer your questions that I've learned over the last 10 years helping startups launch and scale their products. If you have a question, you can ask one down in the chat or in the live chat, or you can actually ask a question in advance by visiting this particular link, which is also in the description of this particular show. So let me know what your questions are in advance. And also, keep in mind that we are live every Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific time right here just to answer your questions. And we got some good ones here today. So let's go ahead and actually dive in. Let's get started. So the first question is, what is traction? And this is kind of it seems like a big, meaty, kind of complicated question, but it's really not, because traction is a pretty straightforward concept, actually, as counterintuitive as that is. So first of all, when we talk about traction, we usually think of it really reductively. We think about traction as sales. Right. And so when you're a startup that's really far along and you have all of these sales, you've got traction. And that's true. But traction is actually a much broader concept than that. I like to think of traction as the acquisition of confirmatory evidence. Right. So as you move along in your startup journey, you're gathering evidence from the marketplace that you're onto something, right? That the rubber meets the road and the car is moving along. That's traction, right? That's where the metaphor comes from. And so when you're really far along, yeah, that is sales. That's the ultimate measure of traction. But when you're all the way back at the beginning of your journey, it's not. So let's work in reverse order. So if sales are all the way on that side of it, before that, you might have some type of early type of sales number. We're starting to get a little bit of interest, and that interest could be measured in users. It could be mentioned in actually getting people to respond to the message. But there's something before the dollars, and then before that, it might be just in how many people are responding to your request to do interviews to talk about what their problems are. Right, all the way at the beginning. So it's a spectrum that really follows the idea of product market fit. So in the early stages, you have the idea of, well, we need to find problem solution fit or customer problem fit, where we want to find out, is there a group of people out there who have this problem? So the evidence that you can gather that that's true is early traction. Then you start working on, is this the right solution to the problem that they are experiencing? And so then you start putting some type of value proposition in front of them to say, like, does this make sense? And as you're getting responses back from that are usually in the form of somebody actually signing up for something, then that's another form of traction. And as you move further along, you move into what we call product market fit, sub-product market fit. It's kind of confusing, but this is where we start looking at, is the engine of our product, is it kind of humming along? Is it working? If we put the offer in front of people, they sign up, they activate, they kind of use the thing. It's making sense. We're charging money reasonably the right way. And then you move on further from there and get into like business model fit, where we have to figure out, like, does the entire thing work such that if we just pour money at it, right? If we go raise a series B of, $20 million or something like that, if we just pour the money in there, will that just accelerate our growth? And that's it. And that's all we have to do and all we have to think about. So that's traction. It's this broad spectrum. So what you really want to do when you think about, like, how do I get from where I am to traction, is you want to figure out what is the next most important question that you want to, that you need to get an answer to. What's your riskiest assumption so far? What do I really need data on? That could be like, do people buy this? But it also could be something like, are there people out there who even have this problem? Can I reach them? Does this message resonate with them? What is the pain that they're experiencing? It's like, what are their particular fears, et cetera, et cetera. So there could be a lot of things, but what is the next question that you need to answer? And then find a way to get the market to answer it. And as soon as you get data back, that's traction. And then you go through the process again. And eventually your riskiest thing is just, if I pour money on this, will it burn, right? Will the engine kind of rip and roar? So that's the concept of traction. It's not as complicated as it seems. It's really straightforward. It's a lot more just about iteration and grind than it is about like getting lucky on something. If you keep iterating in a space, you will eventually find traction. You may find traction somewhere radically different than where you started, and it may take a while to get there, but if you keep at it, you will eventually have traction, as long as you're starting all the way at the beginning. So while we're on the subject of that, another question that I got asked this week had to do with the kinds of traction by stage, and they didn't ask the question as a traction question. They basically asked like, what is it? How do the tactics differ at different stages of the startup? And so this was a startup that they were a little further along, and they're hearing a lot of evidence or a lot of advice that's from people who are like going from 0 to 1 customer. And that kind of advice looks very different. They're like, I feel like I'm past the customer interview phase, right? And so like now, like what do I do? Like how do I how do I engage day to day in my startup life? How is that different than the people who are further along from me and the people who are further back from me? So I want to break it down a little bit, like by putting it into a couple of categories here. So I roughly have these as like 0 to 1 customers, 1 to 10 customers, and 10 to 100 customers. Now, those numbers don't actually mean the number of customers. They're to get to the idea of what we're talking about. So from 0 to 1, we're just saying, can we get anybody right to resonate with this message? Can we get anybody to buy? And so when we're in that particular stage, a lot of the advice that you hear and find is about just talking to customers and listening and hearing what their pain is. And that's what you want to do. Really in that phase of what it's all about. And so this is a really outbound effort. You are actually going to these people. Hopefully you know some of them already, but if you don't, you come up with an hypothesis about where you can find them on the internet. You go and hunt them down and find them someplace. And then, you start engaging them with conversations and interviews and kind of learning from them, right? That's it. It's heavily, heavily, heavily outbound, right? So you're using customer interviews to get into that stage. Then once you kind of get outside of there, we get into this like 1 to 10 range here, which is in again 1 to 10. And if you're in a consumer app, like a B2C app, you're really looking at much larger numbers than this. Whereas if you're in B2B space, that may, you actually may be looking at the 1 to 10 range. But this is where we start to shift a little bit. So instead of like acquiring every customer by doing a manual interview, we're starting to acquire them in a way that's still outbound. We're still like going to them and getting them to respond. But instead of every one of them having to be a customer interview to try to learn from them and then translate that learning into action on their part, we instead get to the action part sooner, maybe get them on a mailing list. So they respond to some message somewhere, they follow us on a social platform or whatever the case is. We try to get them to affirmatively say kind of on their own, yeah, that problem resonates with me, or yes, I like that solution, sounds like it would really help me out. That value proposition resonates, whatever it is. And we try to get them into that space. So it's still focused on our own outbound efforts, but it is moving a little bit in that direction. And this is where when you're further along, you can actually start flipping the script on that. And instead of us doing all these outbound efforts, eventually, when you're in the true growth and scale phase of a startup, what you're actually doing is looking at how can I get people to sort of come in to the process without me having to go out and get them. So this is it's marketing and advertising, right? It's those kinds of things, but it's also referrals. And how do you get that loop, the viral loop kind of going on in that process, right? So that's sort of how you want to think about this. Really early on, doesn't scale at all, highly manual. It's talking to people directly, and then you're moving along a process over time with the acquisition of customers, with the acquisition of evidence that you're onto something, into things that are a little bit more automated. So the details of all that are really going to depend on your particular stage. So I can't answer that as generically as I'd like. So I'm going to kind of keep it there and move on. So that's really all I want to say about traction for right now. I had a couple of questions that I really liked on the idea of retention. So I'm just going to pick this one. It was a generic question: is how do I increase retention? And he was basically saying like, we get users in, but then the problem is once we get users in, they don't stay very long and they just uninstall our app. And so like, okay, so how do we keep people in the system here? And this is where a lot of retention strategies are going to fail you if, and this is a big if, but it's an important if to think about, if your assumption's wrong. Let me expand. So the traditional type evidence for retention has to do with, okay, what can we do to get, in the case of an app, for example, higher daily active users? Like how can we get people to literally get into the app more? So then we start building these features that are designed to try to get them to come back. We do push notifications or whatever, right? We try to get them into the process. Maybe we add social, maybe we add, some type of automation, maybe we add a connection to another tool. So it forces them to like come back and increase the value prop from there. We're trying all these different things to keep the current user engaged. And the question that is often overlooked in this space and was overlooked in this particular case is that you're making the big assumption that you have the right people in the app right now. So in other words, if you have the wrong people, you're spending all this time and all this energy trying to retain somebody who never should have been yours in the first place. This happens really, really often with startups that buy their first users. And I don't mean like they literally go and pay money for them. I mean, instead of making a customer pay, they give them a free version. Like, oh, I want to get feedback on this. So I'm going to let my first 10, 1,500 customers sign up for free, right? Well, they may have never been your customer in the first place, because they didn't actually have to get any skin in the game to get involved. So we don't know at this point if you have a retention problem or if you actually had an acquisition problem. So we need to take a step back and say, is the acquisition part working? Because if the acquisition part isn't working, the retention part doesn't matter yet, because we don't even know who we're trying to retain. So in other words, when you start thinking about like, when you're in an early stage startup, like, and you think about, oh, I have a retention problem, I have these users leaving, ask yourself, are you sure? Are you really sure that the customers that you have right now are your real customers? Are the customers that you really want? Did they feel the pain and feel it so acutely that they went like, oh, for the love of God, sign me up today? And so they hopped on board your platform and then they didn't stay. If so, then it's a retention problem, and we need to put all of our retention strategies into like keeping them in the ecosystem. We need to find out why and do all of that. But if the answer to that question was no, then we don't have a retention problem. We have a customer acquisition problem. We need to forget about retention. We need to let those customers leave. We need to take a step back and say, why do we have the wrong customers? Is it the product? Is it our value proposition? Is it how we acquired them? Like, where in the process did we end up getting people into a product where there was poor fit? Because they shouldn't retain. It's a poor fit. So I really like that question. We get to challenge that assumption a little bit. And I encourage you to kind of focus on that too. Retention isn't always about retention. Sometimes it's secretly, stealthily about acquisition. So keep that in mind. Okay. Pivoting right along to some other questions, I want to talk about a startup pitch. And so this is one of my favorite topics because I've heard I stopped counting the 1,000 pitches. There are a lot of pitches in my time. And I have some pretty strong opinions on the subject. So I want to start with of our two pitch questions. I'm going to start with the basic, like, okay, what goes into a pitch? And so there's two ways I want to address this. So the first one is, and I put some content out on my social channels last week, I believe, on this. So go ahead and check that out. I got a little video on that in a Twitter thread. But basically, we want to think about this your startup pitch as a story, because that's what it is. And oftentimes when we talk about stories, we think about them as, this is Bob. Bob has this problem, and therefore, Bob has all this pain and experiences these side effects, and he's tried stuff and it doesn't work. And so then introducing our product, and now Bob's life is amazing, right? And that is a type of story that is very effective. And I do recommend putting something like that in your pitch. It actually can make a big difference. It can make a lot of sense to do that. But that's not the kind of story that I'm talking about here, because no matter what, when you're looking at your startup pitch, you're still telling a story, but it's the story of your business. And it goes something like this. It goes something like, I'll just put this all into one sentence with no details. There are all these customers out there and they have this big problem, and we have this awesome solution. And if we can charge X, then we can make Y dollars, and we can make this work because our competition, blah, blah, blah. And we have this awesome team, so much so that actually we've made all this great progress already. And what we're going to do next is A, B, and C. And all we need is Y dollars and Z support from you. And we're going to crush this thing. We're going to make this thing amazing. Right. So you're telling the story of why, where, how. Right? It's that kind of thing that you're introducing into the process. And so it's always a story. And so when you think about your startup pitch, you're telling that particular story. And the way we do that is in a proven method. The one I really like is a standard 10-slide pitch deck. It works extremely well. That's why it's so popular. And those 10 slides follow that story that I just told. So let's go through them. I'm going to do it pretty fast. I think I'm going to do a YouTube video on this sometime in the next couple weeks. So keep your eye out for that. If you want more detail, let me know in the comments if you want that video, because I'll put it out. Okay, so here are roughly the 10 slides. So you start with like, okay, this is our problem, right? We're trying to solve this particular problem, and this is the kind of customer, they experience this thing, they have this problem. Our solution is to kind of address it this way, right? So you have a solution slide, and because of that solution, we have this like business model that our solution captures value from customers in this particular way, right? And so that's all amazing and fantastic, and we're gonna make all this money, right? That's where you can sometimes have some opportunity in there, Tam Sam kind of stuff. Your problem, you have solution, the business model, then you have like why it works. So this is your IP. If you have some secret sauce or your magic or whatever, how does the thing actually work at the end of the day? Then you have like, how are you going into, your go-to-market? That's your sales and strategy and how you're actually getting in front of customers, right? And then you have, okay, but we're not the only ones doing this. You have a competition slide. It's that this is how other people are solving it, but this is why it's also subpar. That's where you really commonly see those like XY quadrants, where you have you pick two differentiating factors that all your competition has one of the two, but they don't have both of them, right? And so you're drawing that quadrant as this is mine, right? So the competition. Then you have who you guys are. Why are you credible to do this? So this is the team that we're putting together. And then you have key milestones, projections, kind of where are you going from here with this thing? So here's where we are right now and here's where we're going. The next one is like status. So you kind of put some specifics around that and kind of put some timeline. This is also where you could have use of funds, that kind of thing. If you're actually asking for funding, this is probably where you want to put in use of funds. And then lastly, you have like some summaries. You can wrap the whole thing up and have a call to action. So it's that kind of basic 10 slide thing. It works for a reason. Just stick with it. If you Google Guy Kawasaki's 10 slide template, you can find some easy ones. They're not the prettiest. That's not the point. But they'll show you the 10 slides that I'm talking about here. Okay, and the last question that I got about pitch, which is also one that I really like, is how important is pitch performance? So I've had the opportunity recently to be back at some in-person events and have seen some really stellar pitches at a few different venture conferences lately. And I saw some normal pitches and I saw some fantastic pitches. And I want to talk a little bit about what the difference is between those two. But I actually want to summarize a little bit and say, like, I've got some good news and bad news, right? So let's start with the bad news, Band-Aid right off, right? Is that, I'm not gonna lie, presentation skills, your charisma and confidence, they do really, really help. They can make the difference, between a kind of a mediocre pitch and a really, really good pitch. That having been said, and this is the good news, they're not as important as you think, because the most important skill that you can really have is clarity, and clarity comes from the story you're telling and the narrative arc. So you can give a pitch that is I don't want to say dull, but maybe more on the dull side than on the charismatic side, and actually still be really effective. Maybe not as effective as if you were just as clear and charismatic, but still you're 80% of the way there. You've kind of got that solid down just by having clarity. And then pitch is about changing someone's behavior. So that clarity and that narrative arc, that story that you're telling should be designed to change their behavior. In order to change audience behavior, you have to know who they are and what they're doing. You have to know their why. Why are they sitting and listening to you? And if you can understand that, then you can actually design a presentation or a pitch that's going to change their behavior. And that's the definition of effectiveness, right? Is if you actually did change their behavior and got them to maybe say yes or something like that. The last thing on that, and this is the one I want to expand on a little bit more, is this idea of humility and authenticity. I call this the Shark Tank effect. And it's because if you watch TV shows like Shark Tank or any of it's like sitcoms or dramas that have to do with startups, you get this idea that a good startup pitch is one that's uber confident, it's ego forward, it's about getting to a yes on the spot, it's salesy, it's slick. And then you get a lot of people, and I will put myself in this camp, who watch that and go like, ew, right? Like I don't want to be the guy with the gold, bracelet saying, what do I need to do to put you into this Mercedes today? It's gross, right? It feels gross. And so we say like, oh, sales isn't for me. Well, the problem is that that's like a bad form of sales. It's the negative form of sales. When you go into the real startup world, the journey of a startup who's pitching the first couple times to somebody who had a couple of exits. And so they're pitching, for the probably 300th time, at this point, they've got some success behind them. They know it works. Those pitches dramatically different. And they're the ones that are further along are much more authentic and much more humble. They're extremely confident, but they're also extremely clear about what they don't know. We don't know this stuff. And so I'm not going to try to address this stuff. And so, or they're going to say how they're not going to address it in the pitch, but how they're going to address it in the real world. And so that humility is really, really important when it comes to, how you present yourself to the world. So don't try to sell us on using sales tactics. Don't try to sell us in that way. Try to tell us the clearest possible story that story is compelling. Right. And it's compelling because there's a vision out there and you have evidence for that vision. And then the rest, the performance part, is about getting people excited to come on that journey with you. So it's important, but it's not important. But mostly be authentic, be real, be humble, and just kind of go into that space. So I think I'm going to kind of call that good here for today. So thanks so much for joining. I hope this was helpful. If you have questions that you want to ask, again, hit that link that's in the description, and you can actually record a video if you want to ask a question, and I will play the video during the show, so you can ask the question maybe in a little bit more long form format, which can be helpful. If you want to learn more about me or connect with me on anything, you can hit me up at jdm.bio. Otherwise, I will see you next Thursday, April 21st at 10 a.m. The show will be pre-recorded because I will be out of town, but it'll be a good one. We got some good questions coming in that we're going to record in advance. So get your questions in there, and we'll kind of address those as well. Make sure you give the show a like, and I will see you guys next week. Thanks so much. See ya.